Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good day, and welcome to another edition of Metabolic Wellbeing Without the BS. I'm your host, Martin Gillespie, and joining me today is someone I've been trying to get on the podcast for a very long time, and I'm delighted that he can afford the time and the presence. Dominic D'Agostino, welcome to the podcast.
Martin, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Dom, I know who you are, but for the listeners, can you give an indication of two questions I have for you? Why is metabolic well-being important to you? And what is it about the work that you are doing that you're so passionate about?
Mhm. Well, we've come to learn only in the last decade to decade and a half that metabolic health is the number one factor that determines whether we're going to die of heart disease, cancer, or Alzheimer's disease. So it is, and I think it's actually come almost mainstream where most medical doctors would actually agree with that statement. 10, 20 years ago, no way. But metabolic health is extremely important for prevention, but also it's extremely important for the metabolic management of neurological diseases, cancer, and heart disease. And it can largely replace drug therapy at least 80, I would say upwards of 90% of the time. So if medicine wants to focus on the health of people instead of sick care, they need to, that includes medical schools listening, they need to focus on educating our future medical doctors and clinicians on metabolic health therapies. That includes nutritional therapies and just diet in general.
Wow, there's so much here, Dom. To give the listener a bit of an insight, who is Dom? What makes you an expert in this space?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking. I've always had an interest and a passion for fitness, and then that kind of drove my interest into weightlifting. And I would say my early enthusiasm for nutrition was simply to get bigger and stronger for football and to look better, to get girls, things like that. Also, my brother was quite an athlete, and I was not as much as him. So I wanted to kind of catch up to him. And then in college at Rutgers University in New Jersey, I decided to major in nutrition science. And partway through the program, I realized that this was not a good track to be on if I wanted to become a medical doctor. So I continued majoring in nutrition, but double majored in biological sciences. And then I did research my junior year, basically to put something on my resume for medical school. I started doing basic science research in neuroscience and physiology at Rutgers University, University of Medicine and Dentistry Hospital, actually. And I got sucked into the intellectual, I guess you would say, independence that you get being a PhD scientist. So I did a undergraduate research project thesis, and then that ultimately I parlayed that into my PhD dissertation project, which was the neural control, the brainstem control of autonomic respiration and cardiovascular activity. So how our brain can control our respiration, and conversely, how breathing, our respiration can control our brain. So I was really fascinated into that. And that may sound a little bit obscure, but think about Wim Hof breathing. My research specifically was on oxygen chemosensitivity in the brain, and it had to do with something called sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDS. The etiology of SIDS is largely unknown, but thought to be in part due to a failure of the chemosensitive neurons in the brain. CO2 sensing neurons, like we're all taught that in med school. The drive for respiration was CO2, but there's an area of the brain called the pre-Botzinger complex, and that's the area of respiratory rhythm generation. And there's oxygen sensing neurons in the pre-Botzinger complex, and I studied those neurons. And then that research ultimately led me the most important thing as a scientist is to ask ask the question, like, the most important thing is, what is the important question that you want to ask? If you spend 30 years answering the wrong question, like how this drug works or some obscure pathway works, and you get 20 or 30 years into your life and you look back and you'd be like, oh my God, that was a stupid thing to put all my time and energy into. So I became very interested in work that the Department of Defense was doing, specifically on environmental medicine and developing ultimately ketogenic diet strategies, exogenous ketone supplementation, and then because the military operates in a hyperbaric environment, I was doing research in hyperbaric medicine, but using those same chambers to push the level of hyperbaric pressure way beyond what they use therapeutically. And what this does is actually stimulates oxidative stress in a seizure. And what we discovered, how Dom got famous, I guess is just, that's a big word, but as known for like the keto guy, is that we demonstrated that therapeutic ketosis, that could be fasting, that could be the ketogenic diet or exogenous ketone supplementation, is the most powerful neuroprotective strategy, far more potent than anti-epileptic drugs for preventing oxygen toxicity seizures. So, in 2010 or 11, we took a step back and we're like, okay, this is great for the Navy SEAL, but what does this mean for the general population? So then that exploded the use of therapeutic ketosis in many different applications. And that's, I guess, how I got, how people like Tim Ferriss and Joe Rogan and other people got put on my radar. We were essentially repurposing a metabolic therapy, a standard of care, the ketogenic diet for seizures. We're repurposing that for Alzheimer's disease, for cancer, for neurometabolic diseases, for the management of glucose, reducing hyperglycemia, reversing insulin resistance. It sounds too good to be true. It sounds like a panacea, but you know, we ask people, try to replicate what we're doing with any kind of drug, and you can't do it. So I became very inspired to change from pharmacology research to diet research, but we think about it as like an engineered diet. So we take the existing ketogenic diet that was formulated with Crisco, and a lot of these research diets use seed oils, and even the clinical formulations was the first ingredient hydrogenated soybean oil and stuff. So I realized that, oh, this is an awesome area to get into, because these people are completely not knowledgeable about proper nutrition. So let's get the diet, do a ketogenic diet version 2.0, and we use that in our research with MCTs, omega-3s. We also boosted the protein content from 10% to 20%, because protein malnutrition was a problem in pediatric epilepsy. And it was anyone, if you take someone like Don Layman or Lane Norton or Stu Phillips, and you had them analyze the data, and then look at the kids that are on ketogenic diets, they could tell you it's protein malnutrition. So these are all people and friends in my world. And then, so that it was very obvious to me that we need to increase the protein. So that's going to decrease the ketosis, but we can add back in MCT oil, and we can also favor monounsaturated fats. MCT is pure saturated fat, but so is coconut oil and things. So, but we can titrate in omega-3 fatty acids, monounsaturated fats, and then the primary saturated fat would be omega. Not that I'm demonizing saturated fat, but at the time in 2010, I did think that it was probably a good idea. My views have changed on saturated fat, to put in a greater percentage of monounsaturated fats and omega-3s, because you'd have a lot of saturated fat. MCT is pure saturated fat. So that diet, and then we formulate it in ways to put in a little bit of cellulose, a little bit of prebiotic fiber. We use that for our cancer research, and that worked remarkably well. With Thomas Seyfried's research, he needed to calorie restrict. We actually had the animals eat ad libitum, and we used his model of cancer. He was telling us, no, you got to do calorie restriction. I was like, well, let's just formulate the optimal diet and have them eat it and see if it could, because he actually showed a study in using the ketogenic diet with cancer where the tumors grew faster, with the ketogenic diet than the standard diet if they were eating ad libitum. And that kind of scared me, thinking that the ketogenic diet could make cancer grow. But he said the trick is you have to calorie restrict it. And I looked at the diet and I was like, that diet had seed oils. That was not the optimal diet. So let's formulate the optimal ketogenic diet. Have them eat ad libitum so they don't waste away, so we don't have to calorie restrict. And then we use his VM model of metastatic cancer that made the cover of International Journal of Cancer. And he was all for it. I begged him and pleaded to get the brain tumor cancer, but he wouldn't give it to me because I was thinking the ketogenic diet is good for brain tumors because it has the anti-seizure effect and then has the anti-cancer. It was easier to pitch to the NIH than metastatic
Hold that a
cancer.
second. Hold that a second.
Taking a step back. Yeah. So I became very interested in using ultimately the VM model of metastatic cancer that Tom had recently published. Although I begged him for the brain tumor model, his pitch to me was that the most aggressive model that has ever existed, the most deadly model that has ever existed is the VM model of metastatic cancer, because you implant these cells into the flank of the animal. It's syngenic. It's not immunocompromised. The cancer cells that you inject bioluminesce when you give the animal luciferin. So there's no radiation, no PET imaging is needed to track the tumor growth and progression over time. And the animals succumb to the tumor burden and die from cachexia and ascites and also metastasis to the brain within 3 weeks. So I was like, okay, this is a quick and easy model that's so aggressive that if we test these different things, and chemotherapy was tested in this model, cisplatin and also methotrexate, and I think it resulted in about a 20%, believe it or not, like increase in lifespan, or 30%. So maybe not even that, maybe about 20%. But these are toxic, and they kind of died of the toxicity probably before the tumor burden. So we acquired this model of metastatic cancer, and then he graciously gave it to me, and we bred the mice up, we bred the cells up, and my PhD student at the time, Dr. Angela Poff, or not doctor at the time, now Dr. Angela Poff, who's my co-host for the Metabolic Health Summit, she spearheaded this research as her PhD dissertation research, and her father battled a brain tumor, and I think she was really emotionally motivated, and I have the opportunity to hand select like the top 5 to 10% of students at USF really, because there's so many students, and they just had this at the time, not so much at the time because I was a junior professor, but Angela came to me, and also another student, Shannon Kessel, came to me. Her interest was wound healing, and we did metabolic therapies work better for wound healing than anything that we know of. That's another conversation we could talk about. But Angela came in, she was super intelligent, highly motivated. She was also very articulate, and she was a very good public speaker. And that was interesting to me because she later went on to do a lot of public outreach. But she embraced the idea of using a ketogenic diet with hyperbaric oxygen for the first study. The second study was using a standard diet with ketone supplementation in this model, and that had a remarkable effect. Simply giving ketone supplementation altered metabolic physiology in a way where the ketones had an anti-cancer effect independent of carbohydrate restriction or calorie restriction. But when we did the study, we realized that the mice that were eating ketone ester and ketone supplementation, racemic 1,3-butanediol or racemic DL beta hydroxybutyrate was elevated, that we were creating a model that was replicating caloric restriction, meaning that if you give the ketones, the animal creates an energy deficit, caloric restriction. So naturally, the tumor is not going to grow as fast. So we went back and did a control and weight matched it with calorie restriction, and the mice lived about 20% longer, 25, but they lived 60%. The increase in survival was 60% with the ketone supplementation if we weight matched them. So it was not just calorie restriction, it was being in a state of therapeutic ketosis. Then the next study we did was, and this is what I add, this is what I recommend to patients, by the way. I just cautiously recommend because I'm not a medical doctor, but achieve therapeutic ketosis with a well-designed, engineered, more or less ketogenic diet that's supplemented with a little bit higher protein and MCT. Add ketone supplementation to that to further, it cuts the GKI in half. And we can talk about the glucose ketone index is glucose over ketones in millimolar concentration. So essentially what that does is further lowers the glucose, elevates the ketones just by simply mixing in ketone supplementation with the diet. And then we do a pulse, what's called a pulse protocol, 2.5 atmospheres of hyperbaric oxygen given Monday, Wednesday, Friday for 60 to 90 minutes if you factor in the decompression. So roughly an hour or so, 2.5 atmospheres of oxygen, 3 times per week gives an oxidative burst to the cancer and helps promote, just general health. So this can be done, in the absence or presence of standard of care, chemo, radiation, immune therapy. Immune therapy, ketogenic diets greatly augment the adaptive immunity. So for example, checkpoint inhibitors, PD-1 inhibitors, there's a beautiful mouse model to show this. And more recently, they replicated it in humans at least, and then compared it to a vegan diet, which does a nice job at augmenting the innate immune system. The ketogenic diet dramatically in just 2 weeks dramatically augments the adaptive immune system in a way that theoretically would greatly enhance your body's anti-cancer immunity. So various natural killer cells and
Yeah, I'm going to hold you on a
yep,
little topic there because you brought up the V word,
yep,
vegan.
mm-hmm,
Now,
yep.
there is a massive push right now, and has been for the last 10 years in particular, around veganism, or call it plant-based, regardless how you want to say it. What in your opinion then, how healthy is a vegan diet and lifestyle?
So it's highly dependent upon the formulation of the vegan diet. So I am in contact with people in metabolic psychiatry. I'm in contact with people that have successfully metabolically managed metastatic cancer and brain tumors with a very well constructed vegan diet that needs to be supplemented with, B12, for example. So it does require a very knowledgeable person to do this successfully. And I would highly recommend doing some kind of nutrient testing to ensure that you're not deficient in a number of things. Also, the fiber associated with a vegan diet, some people simply cannot tolerate. Some people have autoimmunity reactions to. Conversely to this, you have the purely carnivore diet, which I was honestly skeptical about, but I've gotten a flood of emails from people showing me blood work, showing me, I mean, like 10 years ago, they started doing this, and I've been in touch with people like Ken Berry, Anthony Chaffee. They have stories and data to back it up. But now it's being, research is being spearheaded by Brenda Lennertz at Harvard Medical School, and I saw that data recently. And I think what I can say from that, it's preliminary because they're going to do a long-term study, that there's no overt changes from a long-term carnivore ketogenic diet that should cause concern. So looking at kidney function, looking at cardiovascular risk, unless you consider ApoB, and that's another story that we can talk about, but every other biomarker went beautifully in the right direction. Now with the vegan diet, I do think a vegan diet is better than the standard American diet for reducing glucose, reducing insulin, creating a caloric deficit where in and of itself, you could have people eating Pop-Tarts and calorically restrict them and see reduction in insulin, believe it or not. Some people may not believe that, but I'm telling you, I come from the fitness world where I've seen, people coached in natural drug-free bodybuilding where they are eating processed food and they calorically restrict as long as it's coupled with exercise and other things. But, and a vegan diet, could be lumped into that, processed food, you could do it. But I've also visited the Hippocrates Institute in Florida, where Thomas Seyfried has been there, and I went there with my wife's father, my father-in-law, and mother-in-law, because we were very curious about what they're doing. I met people there. I walked through their entire protocol. Uh, you have to appreciate that they have gotten great results at the Hippocrates Institute in Florida, but it's a comprehensive protocol, and all the food is organic. It's well, it's laid out so you can construct, you can mix and match certain foods, and they tell you how to do that to get the amino acid profile. Uh, and a lot of other modalities, the sun, for example, breathing, yoga, all these different things can make it look like the vegan diet is actually tremendously therapeutic if sort of uh, a resort or a medical wellness, entity is promoting a vegan diet and saying, look at our results. It's important to go there because I was impressed. I've been in contact with people that went there and they did very well coming out. My thing is that the same thing can be achieved where you can get considerably better results with a restricted, well-formulated ketogenic diet. And only over the last 2 or 3 years would I lump into that a ketogenic carnivore diet. So we went to Budapest, Hungary, and we visited Paleomedicina in Budapest, Hungary. And I specifically asked them I want to go to your files. I want you to pull out the files on patients, or they offered it to me. I wasn't like demanding it. But they said, we went in there and I said, okay, show me a type 1 diabetic, show me a glioblastoma. So they went in and pulled different files and laid out all the blood work and then the scans and things like that. And from a case report, from a case series report, it was very compelling. And I had been a reviewer for different journals, and I knew of their work because I favorably, not initially, I told them I rejected their publications, and I said, well, you got to show me this, you got to show me that. And then they resubmitted. And then I favorably approved their research. And so keto carnivore got put onto my radar, I think in 2017 or 18. And I lump that into a form of a ketogenic diet that is superior in some ways for some people. So that's a long-winded, where I think you asked about the vegan diet, and I think my pitch is that there are people at the Moffitt Cancer Center that follow vegan diets for ethical reasons. And my first blog ever in ketonutrition.org, the first blog I ever did was on a plant-based ketogenic diet because it was like, okay, let me just write a blog on this. My assistant, Christy Storashuk, was like, yeah, because she was a former vegan, I believe, yeah, turned, keto carnivore. So she comes at it from, yeah, like that was beneficial for her, but not as much as, keto. So she helped me out. So the first blog that we did was a plant-based ketogenic diet. And many people of Indian descent, of Asian descent, of mixed descents, they want to follow this further. And there are a lot of plant-based molecules that have anti-cancer effects. I mean, we researched them, we purified, EGCG, for example. Dr. Nagi Kumar from Moffitt Cancer Center, she's a Ph.D., she's a registered dietitian, she oversees all the nutrition research at Moffitt Cancer Center. She has published, some things it worked for and some things it didn't. And that's another story I think we should talk about, because sometimes cancer is lumped into this ubiquitous metabolic phenotype that you just do this and every cancer is going to respond. But, sadly, that's not the case. And I think that's more of a nuanced conversation. With that said, vegan and plant-based diets, you can incorporate various compounds that have well-documented, we're talking human RCTs, documented anti-cancer effects. And they also impact metabolic biomarkers that are intimately associated with cancer prevention and also outcomes for patients that are following the standard of care. So they're like, they can augment the standard of care. So, maybe carnivore people don't want to hear that, but I think fiber and also constituents within a well-formulated plant-based ketogenic diet that's low in oxalates, because I do think oxalates are a problem. However, I think things like phytic acid. So phytic acid is also this molecule, IP6. And also, there's a whole book on IP6, which is, it was given to me by a cancer patient that's doing remarkably well, and he attributes it to. I was like, I've heard of IP6. Let me do some research. Oh, it's phytic acid. Phytic acid is this thing the carnivore community is saying you got to stay away from. It sucks out all the electrolytes from your body, and it contributes to all these deficiencies. However, that is kind of true. So there's some truth to that. If you were to take IP6 in a pill, take it on a first thing in the morning, fasted, and then eat, 2 or 3 hours later, you would get remarkable anti-cancer effects of phytic acid. And it will suck up, it chelates different things and helps you eliminate certain things. So I went down the phytic acid rabbit hole because the carnivore community was targeting that. Rightly so. I would not take IP6 with a meal. Even if I was eating liver or beef or something, it would negate the beneficial effects of that meal. But there are plant-based compounds. Oxalates are the biggest one because they cause kidney stones. And we see this all the time, calcium oxalate kidney stones. So it's actually a big problem with ketogenic diets, to be honest. And part of the problem that NASA lacked enthusiasm for a ketogenic diet in space, and also why the military pushes back on a ketogenic diet. I think the number one reason can be debated, but I think part of it is cardiovascular, the increase in LDL. So that's another conversation we could have. But another more or less, showstopper was talking with the nutrition program at NASA. That logistically, the engineers love it because the energy density of a ketogenic diet is off the scale. It's literally double. It's 50% higher. So the amount of weight that you have to move up, the effects on metabolic mitochondria are neuroprotective. NASA did, MIT did studies, looking at beta hydroxybutyrate and DNA repair, like helping to increasing the fidelity of the nuclear genome for enhancing DNA repair, epigenetic, like all these are beneficial. But if you get a kidney stone on your way to Mars, that's a problem. And clinically, you do see about 5 times the level of kidney stones in kids. So this is in kids. Many of the kids are on medication, coming off medication, and they're not staying hydrated, and they're not taking electrolyte supplements. So electrolyte supplements electrolytes are very powerful buffers in the blood. So they will buffer the acidity. Magnesium and potassium and sodium. Actually, you want to ramp up the sodium, and actually calcium. Our soil, this includes the grass-fed beef from the cow I just had for breakfast that's off my property. Unfortunately, it died right outside my window by a lightning bolt. So, but that cow is actually eating off of our regenerative farm pasture, but that pasture historically was they've grown strawberries and other things, and it is still deficient in calcium. We do everything possible to restore the soil, but we need to acknowledge that calcium and magnesium are deficient in our diets because it's more of an agricultural thing. And if we don't add them back in, the point of me saying this is that if you follow a ketogenic diet, studies were done using potassium citrate and a form of potassium where they put the kids on a well-controlled ketogenic diet, added potassium supplementation, no kidney stones, no significant increase in kidney stones. If you hydrate them, hydration is the most important thing. When you go on a ketogenic diet, you I'm in ketosis now and I have no urge to drink, but I know I'm probably dehydrated, right? So I just
I'm
did
going
some
to
work
take your
outside.
think here
Yeah.
about hydration, and we mentioned this off
Mhm.
camera.
Yeah.
Hydration. Let's
Yeah.
get
Do you want me to
addressing the
mention it?
elephant in the room, alcohol.
Yeah, that's a big one. That will increase, suppress antidiuretic hormone or aldosterone. So you will wake up and have to pee a lot at night. If a lot of people drink alcohol at the end of the day, and then that may be the only fluid they have like after work, and then they go through the night and they pee 2 or 3 times more than normal. They wake up and then they drink oxalate rich coffee to hydrate. So they wake up severely dehydrated and then drink a powerful diuretic that's very rich in oxalates. And then they may have some cereals and other things that are full of oxalates, and maybe a cereal with a little bit of milk in it or something like that. So that's setting us up for kidney stones, especially if your glucose is high. So you want to uh, limit alcohol. Alcohol is another discussion, but 1 glass per day of dry farm wines is what I do, and that's perfectly fine. And I can talk about my blood work about that. But you want to drink fluids at night that's rich in magnesium because that will make you sleep. The very first thing to do when you wake up is surprisingly not take in electrolytes initially. You want to go and drink a good, 16 ounces or, even 500 milliliters of just pure water, and then follow that up. That actually opens up the intestines and makes it possible to absorb electrolytes soon after that. So maybe a pinch of salt, just like a pinch of salt. And then take what I do personally is I do an electrolyte formulation similar to Element, but it's keto start. I had a packet here somewhere, but it's sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium with beta hydroxybutyrate. And I drink a glass of water, I go outside, get some sun, walk barefoot in the dewy grass. I let the cows out, I let the dogs pee, and then I come back and then I drink another, glass with full complement of electrolytes. And also, and I do this more of a for cognitive function, but also it dramatically lowers my GKI, is I do Keto Start by Audacious Nutrition. One half of a packet of the caffeinated version, but it's only 50 grams of caffeine. I have capped my caffeine later in the day, and that's important to do. And then I let that sink in, and then I cook my breakfast. I get the dog's breakfast. They eat steak and eggs. I eat steak and eggs. I feed the sheep. I do all these things, and then I do journaling, and then I get set up for a successful day, which usually takes about an hour. And then I go back to my breakfast that I just made about an hour after hydration, though. So after getting that water to sink in after hydrating, and this has done wonders for my cortisol, for my glucose ketone index, um, and I think for muscle performance, my exercise in the gym. Staying dehydrated is probably the most staying avoiding dehydration, staying hydrated is one of the most important things. Then I follow it up with not a super big breakfast, but typically, a half pound of steak, and I do 8 eggs, but I do like 2 to 4 yolks because I give the yolks, to the dog. So not a massive feast, but that carries me for like 6 to 8 hours until I have my next meal.
I want to address another big elephant in the room,
Mhm.
sleep. How
Oh yeah.
important, in your opinion, in all the work
Mhm.
that you've done, both personally and professionally, why
Mhm.
do we not value sleep that well?
So the conversation of sleep needs to happen if we're talking about metabolic health. And I introduced it into my my lectures, I lecture on neuroscience, I lecture on neuropharmacology, I lecture on physiology. I teach GI physiology. So I talk about sleep in the gut, for example. And my last lecture was nutrition and metabolism to medical students, which finally we're within that 10 to 15% of medical schools that has a mandatory nutrition course. uh, if your diet is off, that's going to profoundly impact your sleep. If and I'm guilty of this. If you go off the rails binging at night, which often happens in people that are intermittent fasting, and people have taken intermittent fasting too far, which I've done that and I have a lot to say about that. Like I don't eat throughout the day and then I would just binge at night and that would screw up my sleep. But you want to get your heavy meal in. For me, that's around, I've been pushing it earlier. My wife and I were doing like 7 or 8 o'clock, and that was really screwing us up. And then we moved it to 6, and now I do it between 5 and 6. And then after that, if it's like a certain workout where I'm like bench pressing or doing arms, I like to go in with a little bit of food in my stomach and then I get a better pump. I get more, but if I'm doing like squats or deadlifts, then I'll do that before the meal. But nonetheless, having, doing physical activity after the last meal and if you wear a continuous glucose monitor and you're trying to optimize your CGM, for me today, I will eat between 5 and 6, and then I always do 1 to 2 hours of walking. My dogs make it non-negotiable that I have to walk. So, today I might get in 3 hours of walking because I have a walk behind brush hog mower. We live on a farm and I have a big field to do. So I will prepare for my podcast the next day, as I did for your podcast today, listening to your amazing podcast. I've given a few where you're talking about yourself and not like your podcast is great too, but you're talking. So I typically listen to that or an audiobook. But the important thing is like a 10-minute walk after a meal is going to be really important and bringing us back to sleep. If I eat a late dinner and I sit on the couch and watch Netflix, or if I have a late dinner with 1 or 2 glasses of wine, I watch Netflix. I didn't eat all day because I was so busy teaching in the lab that I start eating, some Quest bars or even snacking on too much fruit, a bowl of grapes or things like that. That's going to disrupt my glucose. And what I typically see happens with my CGM is that somewhere around 2 or 3 a.m., I go hypoglycemic because my ketones are out of my body, right? And that triggers some kind of stress response. And it's like I'm like wired and awake. However, I can eat a big meal, steak and even carbohydrates. And if I go and do work outside, especially as the sun's coming down and, take my shirt off and I get that red spectrum and the smell of the fresh cut grass. We tend to have a lot of this dog fennel stuff. It has like a very rich kind of smell to it. And I'm trying to explain the scene because it's like, the cows are walking around me, fresh cut grass. I get the red light spectrum. I'm walking, I'm listening to something that enjoy. And that is, these late night walks detoxify the body. So if I drink a little bit of alcohol, that's way out of my system after 2 hours of vigorous walking. And then the very last thing I do when I come in, this time of year, I just swim in the pool. So we're lucky enough to have a pool. And then we bought a house that everything was kind of neglected and had to be recovered. So I recovered the jacuzzi. So when it gets cool out, the best sleep, the thing that has really optimized my sleep is earlier dinners and then walking after that, and then pool and jacuzzi and going back and forth. You could take a hot shower or bath, but and some people have saunas. That's great. That heat exposure coming out of that will trigger vasodilation, and that brings down acutely your body temperature. And that basically tells your brain, especially if you shut all the lights off, it's time to go to bed. And then that first 2 to 3 hours of sleep that you get, you go into non-REM stage 4 deep sleep. So all the things that I mentioned there, if I don't do any of them, I get less than half of stage 4 deep sleep. If I do everything that I just mentioned, and I validated this, like I've done so much experiments on myself, but also, my wife wears it. And we do research on this with the Aura Ring, for example, with NASA. We've done some sleep studies. Uh, so that is, I believe that stage 4 deep sleep is more restorative than the REM. If you're waking up a little bit early, like most people do, you're okay if you're only getting an hour REM relative to 2 or 3 hours, which they say you should be getting. Like, even if I get 30 minutes of REM, I had to wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning the other day at an ungodly hour to take my wife to the airport, but I was wired and energetic all day, and I was the day after that. However, if I screw up and I don't get that deep that next day, I have brain fog. And I validated this over and over. I keep a sleep journal, which I encourage people to do. And that's largely dependent upon avoiding alcohol and avoiding big meals and getting in that late day walk. You don't want to be doing squats and deadlifts at 8 or 9 at night too. So that can be a sleep disruptor.
One
Activates the
sleep
sympathetic nervous system.
disruptor, I want to hold you there to the same concept, is the fundamental aspect, people using these devices, mobile devices, and
Oh God,
scrolling.
I cannot believe I didn't mention that. Yes. So, okay,
What's the
scrap
impact,
everything
Tom,
that I just
on
said.
social media and scrolling?
That's the number one. That's the number one. Yeah, actually, we have a blackout at I didn't adhere to it yesterday because my wife's traveling. She's my accountability partner because I had some important emails and I had deadlines and things like that. Although I slept great, because I got certain emails off my plate, so I was able to relax and then get a good sleep after that. But I'm so glad you brought that up, Martin, because the number one sleep disruptor is not just social media, but text messaging. That's for me, it's emails. So I've been told many times I have an email addiction, and I do like responding back to people. I like, there is a sense of urgency. But I'll describe a scenario that happened 2 or 3 days ago. I get a text message. I had put my phone because it was I went out to mow the lawn, and and 1 hour ended up being like 4 hours, and my phone was dead, the battery was dead, so I just put it on charge. And I get back and I get a message, and it's like someone asking me a question, and then an hour later saying, "Did you get my message?" Then an hour after that, then it says, "Okay, I guess you don't know, or you just don't want to answer my question. Are you mad at me?" Kind of, and this is like, it's kind of like a call, it's not my wife, or she knows better, or, so it's like this chain of email that was happening like every hour on the hour. And it's like, I came in, I felt so great just being free of my cell phone. I didn't go right to my phone. I went into the pool, and then I made dinner, and then it's, oh yeah, my phone. Like, I was just so into the experience of the day. But I think a lot of people have this problem that, our society has immediate gratification, and they want that response. And this person is great. And they're just a type A personality. So it's like, I was like, I'm sorry. I did not have my phone on me. I don't know if they believed me or not. I was like, okay, this is a great question. Let's jump on a call. I don't want to discuss this on text. Let's jump on a call and do this. So to appease them and show them that I was respectful of their time. And sometimes when people message me, like, I get a lot of messages from students, like, did you get my email? I want a letter of recommendation. Like, I'll get that 5 times, and it's like, hey, I'm sorry. I'm sure many people listening to this have the problem that I was like, I'm completely drowning in email. I am sympathetic to your situation. Let's jump on a 15-minute Zoom call, and I will do an interview for you. And then I'll get a sense of who you are, and then I can write a letter of recommendation. But I'm just going by emails, and it sounds like you're a pushy person. So I want to, so I think it's important that if people are angling for your time, and if you are a successful person like a CEO or researcher, where people want to extract information from you. Like, I can't imagine being a huge CEO for a company. Like, you just need so much firewalls to get that. But for me, my problem is I get so many emails from cancer patients, and some of them have kids that have cancers and things like that. I honestly want to stop everything that I'm doing, talk to them, find out what this cancer is, dig into PubMed, dig into clinicaltrials.gov, and figure out how to develop a strategic, targeted, comprehensive metabolic therapy that can help them with or without standard of care. Then I reach out to Moffitt, to those, I want to do this to everybody, but it's like I have to, I have to pick and choose, maybe 10 or 20% of people, but I know I have, in many cases, the ability to help. And that's a problem a lot of people have, I
It's
think.
funny
But
thing, funny.
it's all the phone. The phone is the
The phone is
getting
the
back to the
enemy,
phone.
but you mentioned a wonderful phrase there. If you're a successful person, the CEO, I have a
Mm.
different framing of the CEO because every single day we are our own CEO, our own chief energy officer. And it's about
I like that.
making sure our energy fields with our sleep, our
Yeah.
movement, our nutrition. And I'm going to throw another thing in here that we as a Western society don't give enough credit for, our self-love. Giving ourselves, you mentioned it
Mhm.
there, you take that time in the morning for your journaling.
Mhm.
It's so important for your
Yep.
framework to work on that day. It's not about just working
Mhm.
for the next three
Yep.
months.
Yep.
It's
Journal is always
slowing
good, sir.
down and
Yeah.
actually doing things for your energy space on that day.
Hmm.
It's critical.
Yeah. I call it creative downtime because when I allocate non-negotiable creative downtime into every day. So it's like, I wake up, I look at my journal. I also have like an online calendar, but then I think, okay, where am I going to put my creative downtime? Usually it pretty much always comes at the end of the day, but sometimes I have like late meetings, for people in different countries and things like that. And that creative downtime is and that could be like mowing the lawn. Sometimes that's a Zen experience for me. Sometimes, walking the dog or just different activities. Sometimes it's just sitting in nature. That's when I get a flood of ideas. And I can't tell you that I don't block work out of, I actually think a lot about work. I think about students. I think about patients. But it's my time. So I can choose what I want to think about. And my body is not, I'm not in a reactive phase. I'm in a creative phase. I'm not reacting to emails. I'm not reacting to someone's, need. I clear my mind. I take a walk. Usually it results in a walk. And then I come up with creative ideas to problems that I had throughout the day or through the week. And only when I create have this non-negotiable creative downtime is when I come up with breakthroughs on things. I've come up with ideas like various ketone formulations and applications of ketones. And it's like, oh yeah, there's that disorder. Wait, doesn't that disorder involve this enzyme? And if you give this, wouldn't that block that? And it's like, sometimes I'll stop, I'll take my phone out. I have the audio thing, and I just say, make note, check such and such a plant-based compound on hexokinase activity or something, like PubMed search, or like, and then I keep walking or something like that. So this happens every day, and I'll have on average 5 to 10 ideas during my creative downtime. And sometimes my creative downtime could be listening to a podcast of a particular topic that is relevant to a research project we're working on, or something like that. So, but super important, I think, for your audience, especially CEOs, because a lot of times, CEOs are our greatest asset is like our metabolic health and our health in general, right? But they allocate so much time, effort, and they have destroyed their relationships. And sometimes, and I've seen this, even friends and colleagues get, divorced because they are, and I'm one. So I'm a little bit of a hypocrite talking about, yeah, other people do this. So I'm in love with my work. So my work is kind of my hobby. And if I didn't have my wife with me, my wife is in Hawaii now studying manta rays and also going to an obesity conference, and exploring uh, ketogenic therapies for that. So I have like 2 weeks of like playtime here. And I do notice that I have like, nose to the grindstone 12 hours and I enjoy it. But if I'm not with my wife, I would probably kill myself, with work. So I think it's really important to have that accountability officer and accountability person in your life because you can be addicted to work. So you can be addicted to you can be addicted to good things. So, there are many kinds of addiction. So, sugar addiction is real. Like, sugar addiction will light up the shell of the nucleus accumbens. And, you can look at people's brains that have obesity and dopamine levels are low. You give them sugar, it spikes up. I teach this in neuropharmacology. We can have addiction to sugar, cocaine, exercise. We could have addiction to, you know, all sorts of different things. And the CEO's dopamine response is like getting a deal. The scientist is like getting that next grant or getting the funding, or more importantly, the discovery. And I think that is so it's a good addiction. I remember doing ketogenic diet studies on mice and waking up, not being able to sleep, driving in early to check the mice to see if they're still alive. And I remember this particularly happened when we had our control group that was a high carbohydrate standard diet, they had all died. And then, like, all the ketogenic mice were alive using Thomas Seyfried's VM model of metastatic cancer. And I was like, wow, I think I'm on something. I think this will be important to share with other people. And at the time I was not doing podcasts, but I was also just thinking like publication. So I would go in early every day just to check the mice. Oh my God, they're all still alive. And then it's like I wake up and it's like go in, oh my God, and then they start, eventually they start succumbing to the tumor burden. This was like our first experiment. But during that time I neglected my wife. She might have been no, we were just dating at the time. But she course corrected me because she saw my enthusiasm was diverting attention. Luckily, she's also a neuroscientist researcher. We also have the love of scuba diving together and traveling and all these different things. But if we didn't have overlapping careers and interests where we could see each other so much, it would have not worked out. Like, I would have systematically destroyed that relationship from my obsession with work. And I give my wife a lot of credit for putting up with me during that time. But I'm just throwing out that like addiction is real. Alcohol addiction is also very real. And you don't you don't want to tell an alcoholic, hey, yeah, just have one drink per day as long as you don't get drunk. Just stay sober. Just have one drink per day. You need to have you need to abstain from that. But that is not possible with social media. That is not possible with work. That is possible with sugar, but then people label you as some kind of weird. Actually, if you go to parties and you're not drinking, people think you have a problem, which is
I
kind of
have to
like,
say, I'm going to correct you here a little bit, Dom, because
mhm,
having returned to Scotland, and Scottish people have a global reputation of high drinkers. But I would also put out there that
that's right.
Australians aren't far behind. What I'm seeing is a great little pocket, particularly of younger people, and younger than probably
Mhm.
our generation, of abstaining from alcohol and thriving. And it is fantastic to
Mhm.
see. And it should be
Yep.
endorsed a hell of a lot more.
I've seen that too, actually. Yeah, in the I seen that in the students at USF. I've seen that in the graduate student program. I've seen discussions of this among medical students where I kind of listen in on them. Yeah, like, well, they're doing it because they want optimal brain health. Everybody's trying to achieve neurological superiority, cognitive superiority, I guess you could say, On the other hand, I just was interviewed by a reporter for the use of caffeine. So I was interviewed with three other experts in neuroscience, and so I prepared for it. And college students, I do believe that people are drinking less alcohol and they're aware of danger. I think Andrew Huberman has brought a lot of attention to that, and a number of other influencers, and I think that's a great thing to do. However, I do think that there's an overconsumption of caffeine and energy drinks, and also caffeine and stimulants and pills. And then when you look at the systematic reviews, meta-analysis on this, what you observe is that, hey, it's not with coffee though. Thank God. So it's not with coffee. I still get my 2 or 3 cups before noon, and then I do a decaf brew after that, or I do the keto start coffee, which is you get the benefits of coffee. But so coffee, not so much, but energy drinks and caffeine pills and various stimulants are lead to the use. And this is the students that I teach, because they come in and tell me, they're like, this, everybody's using Adderall, everybody's using like stimulants. They will say, they'll kind of like say, yeah, everybody that, all my, I don't take it, but the students. So I've come to believe that about 20 to upper level academia, during PhD courses, and in medical school, the students that are trying to get to the top, especially, they are using Vyvanse, Adderall, and various drugs to sometimes they save it for in and around the test time, and sometimes they take a load. Like sometimes there are students that they won't sit down and say, okay, they won't prepare and sit down to study unless they take some kind of stimulant to make them retain the information. It's partly a problem with the medical schools because they're jamming so much information. But I'm not sure if that's leading to an addiction, right? Because some of them want to get off these drugs, but I do think many of them are addicted to caffeine. So, and caffeine in the form of coffee is not that bad, but I think we need to acknowledge this, and we're not talking about it. And the reporter is bringing this up because, we talk about recreational drug use. With caffeine, it's just socially acceptable. So you can imagine a time if caffeine was just in a pill and people were taking it, but it wasn't like in coffee, it wasn't something socially acceptable, they would be talking about this drug, but we're just not talking about it. But I think it is a problem. I'm not going to be a hypocrite and say I don't use it, but I use caffeine strategically.
I think
But
so. I'm not a coffee addict, but I love my coffee, and it's something that is
yeah,
very Australianized. And thankfully, Scotland is caught up with some great coffee shops in my vicinity where I am, and I love it.
yeah.
Dom,
Oh, I meant to mention that really quick because excess coffee use and stimulant use leads to alcohol use. So there was this correlation there, and the data is very solid on that. So I meant to mention that because people will then resort to alcohol at the end of the day to take the edge off, and I think that's an important thing to mention, that people be like, they feel like they need to take the edge off on especially like Adderall and
I'm
some other
seeing
things. But
that in a lot of corporates who are still behind the times with the pizza and beers on a Thursday night. And lo and behold, you
hmm
can see the impact on a Friday morning.
yep, yep,
And it's not just 1 or 2 beers. It is that you're that night you are out, if that makes sense. But it's
yeah,
socially accepted, and that's a whole new podcast in itself. Dom,
hmm
how do people contact you? And I hope that they don't contact you at 3 o'clock in the morning and go, "I need this." But
oh, well,
you're
my
very
phone's
active on
off.
social media,
Yeah,
but you've got a plethora, and you're also
Mhm.
extremely well connected to some really smart people. But how can people reach out and find out more about you, your work, and even sort of reach out and go, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And engage with you?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I appreciate it. My website that I started years ago is called ketonutrition.org. So all one word, ketonutrition.org. And that website, I'm not selling anything. I don't have any companies or anything to sell. Well, Keto Nutrition is a company, but it's just an information platform. There's a blog on there that addresses many topics, from how to pick an exogenous ketone to how to manage cancer to on Alzheimer's disease, on the first blog, you got to go way back, 2018, is plant-based ketogenic diet. So ketonutrition.org. The podcast that we have is part of our medical education platform, which is Metabolic Health Initiative. That entity is run by my colleagues, Dr. Angela Poff and Victoria Field. It's an ACCME accredited, the highest level of medical accreditation. And that was recently, I think, we got that renewed. So you can get CME credits for it if you're a practitioner. So it's Metabolic Health Initiative is sort of the entity. And under that, we have the Metabolic Link podcast, which we interview the leading experts in clinical research and basic science. And we also interview, because I think it's so important, we interview patients. And I think we learn more from the patients than anything else. So Metabolic Link podcast, and then the Metabolic Health Summit, which we had a virtual component, which is great for people who could not attend. And that was back in February 2024. And we're trying to figure out the next when the next Metabolic Health Summit would be. But we had like 800 people there. And we had a very big footprint. And I think you'll appreciate this because I know you're interviewing many people that were there in metabolic psychiatry, which we didn't really get too much time to talk about. But I want to briefly mention that, I was basically involved in research, PhD research, on the use of ketogenic therapy for alcohol use disorder and benzodiazepine withdrawal disorder. So that's another emerging application of diet therapies, specifically ketogenic diet therapies. So we highlight neurological diseases, epilepsy, of course, metabolic psychiatry, cancer, at the Metabolic Health Summit. And Chris Palmer was, one of our favorite speakers. But we also, and I think I want to emphasize this, is that for this community to thrive, we need to partner with industry. So that industry can include people like you that have a platform that are promoting and amplifying education outreach on metabolic health, but also industries that develop ketogenic nutritional, whether that be a whole food based system or exogenous ketone supplement or a wearable device like a continuous glucose monitor or continuous ketone monitor, or an app that makes you adhere to your diet, or various, devices, in the field, or also various laboratory tests. Like, there's a number of companies that are scrambling to this space that will allow you to just stay at home and order the test and then put your blood on blood spot cards and then send that in. And you don't have to go to the lab, and you could do it, on your own time, in your own space. So I think there's a lot of companies bringing innovation. I think it's important to partner with them, give them a platform, and discuss their technology, on podcasts.
Dom,
that was a mouthful, I know. So
that is a mouthful. Dom,
yeah,
I could speak to you for hours, and I know that we're all almost on the same pathway. And what I really did like about the last hour that we engaged is the humbleness of being able to sort of change your mind as more research becomes available is really important. And the one key area which I feel is extremely important is you and I don't have all the answers, but it's the engagement with others, the engagement with, as you rightly said, the partners with industry, the partners with academia. And to get that nucleus in the middle, there is such an area which I believe is underdeveloped, and that's the area of personalized health coaching for individuals and for groups.
Hugely needed. Yes.
That is hugely needed to take some of the burden from the medical system, who do some great work, but unfortunately they're not trained on prevention, but they're very good. If you and I get knocked down by a bus tomorrow, I want a bloody good doctor. The health coaching is underdeveloped, but so needed in this space.
Mhm. Yeah,
And whether it's personalized or groups, and to really re-educate people from that thinking and moving away and understanding that you are your own metabolic health being.
absolutely. Yeah, it's like you're the N of one experiment. So there's a lot of research there, but out that's published, but it may not apply to you. What applies to you is your own biomarkers, how you feel, and this N of one research is actually like write that down, make note of that, because I think that is the future of medicine. We're going to become our own experiment where we can, through biomarker testing, through wearable devices, through feedback, we can learn what is the optimal diet, supplementation, sleep regimen, exercise, things like that. And genetic testing also plays into that. So genetic testing, so I overexpress the MPC1L1 receptor, so I can microdose tiny amounts of something called ezetimibe, and that can lower my triglycerides, but also ApoB. So there's tests that are available, and then that information can go into like a platform, and people are developing, but they need health coaches along the way to then they get the information, but to make it actionable, the health coach needs to also maybe have access to that information. And then they can then coach that person. And now, whether or not that health coach has to be a medical doctor or a registered dietitian or just a knowledgeable person, some of the smartest people I met, don't have any fancy degrees, but I also see the potential for developing sort of accreditation, like courses where it's like the health coach will follow these 7 principles or something like that, and just having a network of people would be super helpful for me. And you could be a major resource for that, but I know so many people come to me and I have such limited bandwidth. I need to offload them to people that can help them,
I'm
and
going
maybe
to I'm
maybe
going
that's
to
it.
reframe one of the phrases that you said beautifully
Mhm.
about your wife. A health coach can be your accountable partner in the pathway
Mhm.
to
Yep.
your optimal metabolic well-being. And I
Yeah.
think that
It doesn't have to be complicated. Yes.
let's keep this simple.
Simple.
Dom,
Yeah.
I'm going to thank you from everybody involved in metabolic well-being without the BS. The gift
Mhm.
of the presence of your time, wisdom, and knowledge has been a masterclass. I need to get to one of your lectures and start questioning some of your things, but engaging with you more, because you're just a gem of wisdom. And on behalf of everybody here, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day. Go and get onto the yard and cut the lawn.
Yeah. Oh,
And
I got work to do, but
you've
I'll
got
do
work to
that
do.
after. Yeah.
Enjoy the
Still
rest of
early
the day, my
here. Yeah.
friend. And
Thank you,
I
Martin.
hopefully speak with you soon.
Thank you. Appreciate it.